Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm just getting going in a minute. Okay, turn that off. Alright, thanks for joining me. If you could say hello in the comments down below, that would be really good. I'm going live on Facebook and on Instagram, on my own Instagram account at the same time, so if I keep doing this, that's because I've got two devices right in front of me and I'm trying to focus on the right area. Thank you very much for joining me. So far, who have we got? I know Emma Hardcastle is watching. Thank you for coming, Emma. Who else is watching on Instagram? Hi, Emma. Thanks for saying hello. When you log on, just say hello in the comments down below. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining. Just say hello in the comments down below. Hey, Steve. Thanks for coming. Hey, we get some new people here tonight. This is great. I've got a whole new audience. I love it. And if you wouldn't mind, if you're watching this on Facebook particularly, go down to below where this video's come up on your Facebook profile, on Facebook timeline, and click on the watch party, click on the start watch party, so that you can share it on your own timeline, because the more people that see this, the better, and we know that, obviously. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me. Thank you for, I haven't gone live on Instagram. Hang on, here we go. Let's go live on Instagram. I was wondering why nobody was joining me on Instagram. Right, here we go. Kerry, thank you for joining me. Yeah, so say hi. I've just gone live on Instagram now. If you're watching on Instagram, for those of you that are joining me on Instagram, why don't you say hello in the comments down below. It'd be good to hear from you, good to know where you're coming from, where you're watching from. Now, I know some of you may not have seen, or at least certainly haven't joined me for the previous Tuesday night lives. So I would love to hear from you as we're going throughout the evening. Feel free to drop comments in, drop questions into the comments. Feel free to share what your thoughts are, some of your responses and your reactions. Hi, Dawn and Norman. Hi, Tracy. Thank you for joining me. Just share your thoughts in the comments, and I will do my very best to respond to you, either within the talk or at the end. I'll try and catch up and say hello. But thank you so much for joining me. The last couple of weeks we've done some kind of group lives. It's been really good. We've been chatting to people and talking about their experience as a worship leader. Hi, Ali. Thank you for joining me. Hi, Mom. Thank you for joining me. We've been talking to lots of people about their experience of growing as a worship leader, particularly remembering that moment where they realised, they understood that when they moved from just singing songs, just turning up at church and singing songs, because that's what everybody else they saw doing, to actually engaging in worship and understanding what it was about, and feeling like they were connecting with God through worship, through the songs that they were singing. There have been some really good conversations. So if you can, go back, have a look at the videos. The videos are on the Family Church Facebook page, and they're also, I've uploaded them onto my own YouTube channel. Yes, I've got my own YouTube channel. Now I'm doing all these videos, I want somewhere to put them. So if you go onto YouTube and search for Matt Lockwood, there are quite a few Matt Lockwards on there, apparently. It's not an uncommon name. But you'll see immediately that it's me, because my profile pic. Also on the YouTube channels are some videos of some conversations that I've been having with other worship leaders. I've been getting to chat with some other worship leaders. Actually, the way the list is building all over the country. In fact, next week I'm going to be chatting to a worship leader over in the States. The whole idea about those conversations is that we get to hear leaders' journeys, how they've grown as a leader, the challenges that they've faced, what they've done to overcome those challenges, the successes that they've had, how they grow themselves, how they grow their team, all that kind of thing. Some really good conversations. There's 4 up there now on my YouTube channel. So if you're trying to find me on YouTube, search for Worship Leader Conversations, and my videos will be the first ones that come up, which is great because no one else is having worship leader conversations. So that's really good. There's some really good conversations, particularly if you're in a worship team or you're a worship leader. check those out. There's some really good conversations that we've been having. So next week I'm going to be chatting to Brannon, a worship leader over in Texas. And further down the week, I'll be chatting to a worship leader up in Fulham in London. I'll be chatting to a worship leader up in Birmingham. Chatting to, who else have we got? All over the place. Wigan as well. There's a worship leader up in Wigan I'm going to be chatting to in a few weeks' time. And the aim of that is not just to hear about people in the same style and the same way of doing things, but it's to understand how people grow as leaders. So it doesn't matter what denominational style or tradition or anything like that. It's about how people grow as leaders, and there's some really good stuff. Even if you're not a worship leader or in a worship team, but you are a leader, there'll be stuff in there that you can pick out and bring into your own leadership. Because for me, as a leader, one of the best ways that I've learned to be a leader is by watching other people, and learning's the good stuff, but also watching the bad stuff and realizing and understanding why it's bad, so that I can avoid bringing that into my own leadership. So learning from other people is a great way to grow as a leader yourself. And we're all leaders in some aspect or other within life. So there's so much that we can learn. Now I can see there's some more people joining, and thank you for joining in. Say hello in the comments. I'd like to say hello back to you. Let me know where you're watching from. All right, so tonight, hi Shirley. Tonight, rather than having the conversations, I don't want to do the same each week. Tonight I'm going to share some thoughts. There's some thoughts that I've kind of just been bubbling around the last couple of weeks, and I've jotted them down, and they're I apologise if it's a little bit incoherent because they're still working through me, but I want to start sharing this because the whole point, the purpose of these Tuesday evening sessions is to help us all grow as worshippers, and particularly now where we're in a season where we don't have the Sunday morning meeting that we're used to, that we kind of almost came to rely on. We don't have that anymore, and so there is this opportunity now to grow as a worshipper, actually without crutches, without scaffolding, without support, but we have to determine to grow as a worship leader, and it is a challenge to not be able to meet with other people, but it's a challenge that we can grow through. It's a challenge that we can learn in. Hey Tash, thanks for watching. I just saw you come in there. Stay with me. Say hello in the comments. So these sessions, they're all about helping us grow as worshippers. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about altars. One of the interesting things, discussion points that's come up in this time, particularly in the Church of England, but also in the Catholic Church as well. So Matt Chris from Family Church Makati. Thank you for joining me. It's great to have you all the way from the Philippines. Love it. Thank you for staying here. Thank you for watching. All right. Yeah, one of the interesting things that's come up, particularly in the Anglican and the Catholic churches, is this almost it's becoming an argument over can things like the Eucharist and or communion and worship, can it take place in the home over a kitchen table, or should it be done in a church building that is sanctified for worship? And it's probably going to become one of those issues that kind of defines this era for some churches, is how do they move through this kind of period. But I want to talk about altars and what altars are, because I think if we can understand and get a good strong understanding of what altars are, I think the worship that we pursue here at home can grow and blossom and flourish. So altars, I think we have a fairly good understanding of what altars are all about. Altars have been the centre to whatever kind of worship there has ever been throughout the history of the earth. Altars have been at the centre of that. Altars are they're fixed in our thinking. They're fixed in the way that we think about worship as being the connection point between the physical and the spiritual. So whatever it is that a person is worshipping, that altar is almost like it's that connection point between the spiritual and the physical. That's where they meet. Altars represent sacrifice. They represent death. More often than not, we think of altars as being the place where animals are sacrificed as part of a worship Old Testament kind of worship service, or some other kind of religion that uses animal sacrifice as part of its expression of worship. It's a place of sacrifice. It's a place of death. And there are many occasions throughout the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, where altars are talked about and referred to. They're talked about as a way of connecting with God, either as bringing a request to God or as thanksgiving. Let me give you some examples. Jacob, he builds an altar at Bethel after he sees he has the dream and he sees the stairway to heaven. He has this encounter with God, and when he wakes up, he builds an altar there. Noah builds an altar to offer thanksgiving for safely coming through the flood and settling back down on solid ground. Both Elijah and the prophets of Baal build altars to call on their gods. Elijah on Jehovah, the prophets of Baal were calling on Baal, but they all built altars to do that. There were altars in the outer temple area, in the temple in Jerusalem, that were there, and in the tabernacle, that were there for the sacrifice of livestock as part of the Jewish worship. The Ark of the Covenant was kind of an altar because it was kept in the most holy place, as a point of connection to God that was engaged only once a year by the high priest. Another example, David builds an altar on the threshing floor to get rid of a disease that is plaguing his land. Altars are referenced in the New Testament as well. Paul, when he's in Athens, he sees an altar to the unknown God as he's walking around the city. And so as he's gathering with other people and talking to them about Jesus, he picks up on the altar to the unknown God and tells them who that unknown God is. What's interesting when it describes Paul talking about referencing that altar is that what he says about this unknown God that he's sharing with them is that God, in that God, we live and move and have our being. And it's very interesting because Paul turns what the concept of an altar is almost on its head. Because an altar, like I said, is supposed to be representative of sacrifice and death. And yet Paul is talking about through this altar, we have access to life. To this, what he was using the term, the unknown God. We know he was talking about Jesus. But he was talking about this altar giving access to life. In him we live and move and have our being. And the writer of Hebrews as well, in chapter 12, describes our lifestyle should be one of where we lay our lives on the altar as living sacrifices. Again, that idea of the altar being a place of death is turned on its head. Excuse me. Is turned on its head and is being shown as a place where we actually receive life. When we lay our life down, we receive His life, and we are still when you put something as a sacrifice on an altar, it's supposed to be dead. You're not supposed to have sacrifices on an altar that are alive still. They're supposed to be dead, and yet the writer of Hebrews turns it around and says, in putting yourself as a sacrifice on the altar, you find life. Now we understand what an altar is now, in these days, when we see them in churches across the country, represented either by some kind of ornate structure or just a simple table with a cloth. They're the place where the communion or the Eucharist is ministered from, connecting the remembering of Jesus' sacrifice and death for us, that ended up bringing us life. In the Catholic and Anglican Church, that altar will be placed at the east end of the church, modelling the temple that Ezekiel prophesies about in his vision. In Reformed churches, it won't be called an altar. It'll be just a table set at or near the front of the church. But for all intents and purposes, it's an altar. It's interesting that the whole Reformation period, they pushed against the extravagances of the Catholic Church right then, but they then brought it all back in again, but just simplified it and gave it different names. It's very interesting. We even, in a lot of churches, we even have what's known as the altar call, which is basically where people come forward to surrender their lives to Jesus. You know, it's usually tied in with the prayer of salvation. They surrender their lives to Jesus. So even though there isn't a physical altar present, there is still the sense that there is a sacred place within our buildings, whatever shape they are, where a connection is made with God. But is it about a physical location, I wonder? Well, one of the interesting discussions, like I said, is about whether ministry needs to have a physical altar to be present for that ministry to be authentic. Many people hold sacred space as very important to faith, not dismissing the faith connection between us and God that takes place in our heart, but that historically there have always been places where God has connected with humans that have since then carried a sense of honour and sacredness, in the same way that the Old Testament altars that we talked about earlier marked encounters with God, you know, like Bethel. But what does that mean now for us learning to worship at home? Should we have a physical altar, a sacred space in our homes? Should we rearrange the dining room furniture so that the table can be repurposed, or clear a space in the living room for something dedicated to the purpose? We understand the principle of setting aside areas of our home for the purpose of memorializing or honoring. If you think, you know, if you were a football fan or a fan of pop music as a teenager, it's likely that your bedroom would have memorialized a particular team or a particular pop group. But we're not talking about shrines here. We're not talking about memorializing here. Shrines are different. They memorialize something that has gone, or that isn't, you know, is I've lost the word, but you know, that memorializing something is not the same as having an altar. Having an altar is where when you have an altar, you have a life-giving transaction. Shrines are just a memorialization, a remembering of something. We're talking about, do we need to have an altar, a place where that life-giving transaction between us and God is taking place? Jesus talked about altars in his conversation with the woman at the well. If you remember in John, he writes about it, where Jesus was having this conversation with the woman, and he calls her on her lifestyle, and so she turns the conversation around and throws in that question. You know, you Jews say that you should worship in Jerusalem. The Samaritans say that it should be somewhere else in Samaria. Who is right? Where is the right place to worship? And Jesus, rather than getting caught into a whole debate about physical sacred places, physical altars, he turns it around, turns it upside down, and talks about heart attitude. Jesus wanted her and all of us to understand and to see that these physical acts of worship that take place in physical places, they have a spiritual beginning. They start, first of all, in God's heart, searching for his people who will seek him. People who will seek after him, not after doing acts, but people who will seek him. So, what's all this about then? Where are we going with this? So right now, we're at home, we're locked down at home, we don't have the Sunday morning meetings to go to. We're learning how to worship at home. We're learning how to make our home a sacred place. We're learning how to build an altar here in our home. And I'm not talking about physical altars. I mean, you may want to do that, I don't know, but that's not what I'm talking about here. We're talking about how do we make our home a place of worship, a place of sacrifice, a place of surrender, a place of connection between us and God. Just want to say hi to those of you that are been joining us. Val from Devon, Sandy from Hoskins, what I'm talking about. Sandy up in Waterlooville, Chloe, hi, Arika and Russ on Instagram as well. Thanks for joining this. You need to go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning so you know what we're talking about here. We're learning how to worship at home right now, and it's such a good thing, because to a degree that our understanding of worshipping from home has been lost to a dependence upon the Sunday morning meeting. We've become so used to it that we become dependent upon it. And listen, we're not talking about our devotional time here with God. That's something different. I mean, it's all part of a worship lifestyle, but we're not talking about our devotional time. We're talking about establishing within our homes a sacred place. We're establishing within our homes an altar where we connect with God, where we as a family, or whether each of us on our own, but we find that place in expression worship where we're connecting with God here in our homes in a real and authentic way. Like Jesus said, people who worship him in spirit and in truth. That's not physical. We're not talking about whether it feels right or whether it looks right. We're talking about a spiritual connection, and we're talking about an authentic connection. We're talking about making time in our homes to worship God, actually building a spiritual altar where we intentionally surrender ourselves to God and be filled with his life. That can be at any time, not just as the 10:30 on a Sunday morning, watching the live stream or wherever it is. That's throughout the day, throughout the week. This is where we are now, because we can't gather together, we won't be able to fully for a long time. We're learning to do something brand new. This is kind of why my thoughts around this are still a little bit vague, and I'm trying to pull it together, because I'm looking for that new thing. I'm looking for how we learn to worship here at home and not feel uncomfortable about it, not feel weird about it, not be like, oh, do I have to do this? Do I have to pretend like I'm in the meeting, or do I have to do the things that I used to do in the meeting to feel like I'm worshiping? I'm talking about finding a way of establishing within our homes a place of worship, an altar of worship where we can authentically surrender ourselves to God and engage in that transaction where we lay down our lives and receive his life into us. We're learning to do something new, probably a little uncomfortable, weird at first. But if, when we come to worship God, we come with the intention to surrender our life and receive his life, we build within our home an altar, a point of connection with the presence of God. And I think that's really important. I think that's what God wants to do in us, in the church right now, not just in our church, but in the church worldwide, is that he's through this situation. This situation wasn't started by God. God didn't cause it. But we're here, and God is here with us. And God is speaking into this situation. I think we can take the time to listen and hear what it is that he's saying about what he wants to do in us and through us, because the reach of the church at the moment is exploding. One of the things that happened this weekend, you'll see on Sunday that loads of people's Zoom meetings collapsed, particularly people who were live streaming, using it to live stream their church service. And the joke went around, the church has broken the internet. I mean, who would imagine that people will be talking about the church breaking the internet? But that's where we are now, where there's so much interest in, not so much in the church as organizations, but just there's a desire to connect. There's a desire to connect with God, to connect with something deeper than the surface, what we're seeing, what we're feeling. Before we went into this lockdown, there was probably about 6% of the population of the country engaged in, and they used the term, where I read this, religious worship, which covers the whole broad spectrum of worship. 6% engaged regularly, weekly, in an active religious worship. A couple of weeks ago, it was announced that 25% of the population were engaging in some way or form with an act of religious worship. I mean, that's a huge leap. And it's so good to see that the church is embracing where we are now and growing into it. But this is just like the people who are running this is the leaders of the church, and the people who are going live on Facebook are doing this. For us here at home, we have to find a way of learning and growing as worshippers, and not treating this time as just like a stopgap. We're just going to sit here, wait for it to be all over, and get back to where we were before, because that's not going to happen. Whatever it is that we come into, coming out of the situation, it's not going to be the same as it was before. And so whatever it is that we come out into, we have to come out into it strong and healthy. And that means not just sitting around on our sofas or on a Sunday morning waiting for the live stream on church to happen, but it means building church, building an altar of worship into our daily lives here at home, and finding and discovering again what it means to be a worshipper at home. And that's our challenge. And so tonight was really about starting again that conversation and directing us towards that aim of developing our home life, our family life, whether we are with families or whether we're living on our own or with other people, in whatever form or shape it takes. You know, worship is still worship, and we have so much more to learn about what worship is, and so much more to grow. You know, we have an opportunity now to discover a whole aspect of worship that we've never really experienced before, because we've just got used to the whole going to church on a Sunday morning, you know, maybe going to another meeting at some other point. We've got used to it, and now we don't have that. And so now we have this opportunity to grow and to find in our homes that place of connection with God, of intentionally building, as it were, an altar of worship here in our homes, in whatever way that takes, where we connect with God and where God can connect with us, where we can lay down our lives upon that altar as living sacrifices and receive back from Him His life in exchange. It's such a great opportunity. So I hope that through some of what I've said, I hope through all the jumble, that you've picked up some stuff here and it's got you thinking, because this is what it's all about. This is about getting you thinking so that you can go away and think about, how do I make this happen? What is God speaking to you through this? You know, it's not just about the words that I've said here and some of the statements that I made. It's about, what is God speaking to you through this? Where is God wanting to lead you as a worshipper? And what does God want to do to develop that worship life in your home? You know, we're all leaders here in our home. Wherever we are, we can all lead ourselves in worship. You don't need me to turn up at your house with my guitar, start playing away, saying, right, here we're going to sing this song, right, there's so build my life, right, here we go. You don't need that, because you can lead yourself in worship. And so the opportunity that we have with ourselves here is to learn how to do that. And that's the journey that we're on. And we're going to be continuing down that journey over the next few weeks and months. Because who knows where this leads? Who knows what this will birth? Who knows what will be happening in a month's time, how it will look. But it's exciting, because God wants to do something fresh in us. This is new wine season. And we need to throw out the old wineskins, because they won't work in this new wine season. So thank you for listening. If you've got any comments that you want to add in, if you're watching this on catch up, please throw your questions and your comments into the comments block below, because I can still respond afterwards. I would love to connect with you. I'd love to chat further with you, any ideas and thoughts that you've had from this. And don't forget, you can re-watch some of the previous videos here on Facebook on the Family Church page, or on my YouTube channel as well. Check that out. Check out the Worship Leader Conversations. Loads of good stuff there. Thank you for joining me tonight. I will see you back here next Tuesday evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.